It's very nice to be here. Thanks, Jody, for a very kind invitation to participate. It's also nice to simply be standing after having been folded into a regional jet for the last 90 minutes or so. So this paper is about two things. First of all, it's about Mcluhan's idea of tactility, and the second is that of the promise or the peril of all of those flat screens that are popping up everywhere. And I'm sure that the Drake Hotel is bristling with flat screens. One of the most enduring figures in ongoing efforts to decode the experience of television is the medium's tactility. Whether it is a trope of stickiness, massage, jolts, and other body blows, or the effects of a protruding gaze of an eye window frame, potato processing pablum dispensing machine seems moot. The idea of television screens' tactility entered the technological imaginary when Marshall McLuhan theorized TV images as projective tactile promptings. He wrote of the plastic contour of a light-through device and the ceaselessly forming contour of things limned by the scanning finger. That was one of his favorite figures, the scanning finger. Besides the intimation of a coming shift from medium as message to that of massage in the late 1960s, these cryptic remarks on the scanning finger at once evoked the continuous process of scanning, technically called raster scanning, from left to right, across, and then down, odd and even lines, by means of electron beams focused and accelerated by the cathode ray gun and its opposite, a anodic cell, ultimately to be directed by the magnetic fields of the steering coils, sweeping across the lines of the phosphor-coated mesh and the gestural pointer that follows a line of text. The finger that Mcluhan gave us could also be taken too literally because, as he clarified, the tactile image involves not so much the touch of skin as the interplay or contact of sense to sense, of touch with sight, with sound, and with movement. The tactility in question was rather synesthetic, tactuality, or, as Derek de Kirchhoff once described it, multi-sensory seduction. But the salient point is that the machine stares down the viewer. Moreover, these scanning fingers are being pointed in two directions, from the screen to the retinas of the viewers, whom it is said for de Kirchhoff to prime or even irradiate with its cold blue light, a light without images, and even contaminate, mesmerize, and transistorize. The TV scanning finger is thought to transmutate those at whom it is pointed, turning them into screens and terminals, mediatizing them so that they may interface and enter into communication. The scanning finger of the TV audience, no longer even permitted to passively vegetate, but condemned the labor of participation, is loaded with remote control zappers. And further, it has its mind's eye, it has its mind's hands full of eyes and glances it continually throws back at the screen. Figures of tactility are creatures of specific junctures in media and communication studies. One version of this argument is that in the transition from a hypodermic to a resonance model of communication in the early 1970s, which was heavily influenced by brain hemisphere research, figures of tactility took pride of place. If the injection of a message through some medium by a sender into a passively waiting blank slate of a receiver could be reconfigured such that each element was less isolated and in fact subject to new combinations emphasizing form over content, and the receiver was less passive and more active, already full of a complex matrix of codes, and hence more actively engaged, then messages could be crafted so as to draw out to some degree those codes, those needs and expectations they would meet upon their reception. Another version is specific to the development of Mcluhan's own thought and the turnabout from the analyses of the Mechanical Bride to those of Understanding Media, as far as the tension between tactility and mechanization are concerned. To put it bluntly, for Mcluhan, where mechanization was, tactility would be. which is to say, if the bride of mechanization was pneumatic and vehicular in a world of looking without touching, then the bride of electronic media was barefoot and topless in a world of multisensorial tactuality where looking was touching, and vice versa. Mcluhan's vision of media and pop culture changed radically from the 50s to the 60s. Tactility, as Don Thiel has pointed out, is the essential symbol for the intersensory operation of the body's processing of sensory material. At times, the erotic potentialities liberated by tactility were too much, even for Mcluhan to bear, as Thiel, I think, astutely observes. But tactility also left itself open to critique and distortion in the form of dysfunctional representations of televisual contact. The extension of the senses in technologies in Mcluhan's celebrated sense of outering was also applicable to the TV screen and its less than felicitous promptings. Pop performance band The Tubes used a combination of infant cradle chair upon which a small TV set was mounted with a nipple attachment as cover art on their release of an album in 1979 called Remote Control, upon which they sang about telecide, while simultaneously helping to usher in the area of rock video. This extraordinary image makes TV nurturing ambivalent. It also alerts us to another tradition of television studies, English cultural and media studies, in which the medium, in those works of Richard Hogarth, for instance, in the early 1960s, is thought to have an educative kneading effect. This is the cooking class version of television. Media studies, British media studies figure John Hartley, for instance, explicated this image in a remarkable series of reflections on dough, quoting at length British chef and cookbook writer Elizabeth David, the gloomy sensualist, who wrote about bread making. Anyhow, Hartley's point was that you really have to understand bread making in relationship to a couch potato who is warmed, puffy, spongy, and gaseous after hours of viewing. And another sense of the term, which is equally relevant to the inquiry, and Hartley said this: feline kneading is said to be what kittens do to stimulate mother's milk, otherwise known as pap. Hartley isolates the ambivalence of pleasurable nurturing and sensuous massage and sucking as a reductive manipulation. After all, pap is slang for a soft substance without value. But he reminds us that Hogarth, earlier on, used the imagery in an entirely positive sense, perfused with vigor, stimulation, and engaged in a process, again with reference to dough, of proving popular consciousness. Hartley recounts it this way: television proves popular consciousness by aerating it and allowing the mixture of detailed and intelligent presentation and the texture of other people's lives, assumptions, hopes, to ferment in the warmth of the suburban kneading trough until general education has occurred. Until the audience rises or fails to rise to the occasion. The passage through the universe of orality from the nipple to the cigarette to the bottle to the nipple, as a rave paraphernalia, passes right through the television. But perhaps the most extended elaboration on the tactile promptings figure in pop culture is David Cronenberg's Videodrome. With this example, we leave behind the fairly benign figure of dough and even the potential provocations of sensuousness and enter into a more diabolical yet identifiably Canadian imaginary, right down to the character of Professor Brian Oblivion, a parody of Marshall McLuhan, who spouts oracular statements about the TV medium and runs the cathode ray mission. Some of you may remember this film. And the cathode ray mission offers daily doses of the tube to the homeless. Cronenberg's vision shows how tactility hypertrophies into inducing tumors by means of an experimental broadcast called Videodrome. The plot traces the passage from positive promise, therapy and social good, to the deleterious diversions of tactile TV that I have been trying to